Hello, friends and rock and roll lovers. Welcome to what I have chosen to call a history of rock and roll in film and rock and roll. You may call it what you like. Now, today we're talking about Kiss, and I'm going to get into this real fast. I'm going to put my biases up front. I'm going to give you this disclaimer. I love Kiss. Even though I was not the target audience age-wise for Kiss, I came along way later than I believe most of the target audience would have been originally. I do not make apologies for Kiss or any of the choices they made, though. As much as I'm enthusiastic about a lot of their songs, this is a dodgy bit of work here, the old Phantom of the Park episode. So I am not reverent about it, but I'm having fun reviewing it. For the band, the origins of Kiss meets the Phantom of the Park go back to the end of 1977. They had already been in a Marvel comic book for the first time, and there were talks after Love Gun was finished at the end of that year with Hanna-Barbera, a production company that's obviously responsible for the Flintstones, the Jetsons, Yogi Bear, a million other cartoons that were popular in the mid to late 20th century. If you're not aware, you can look that up. But I mean, the Flintstones was the only sitcom on primetime TV that was animated until The Simpsons came around in 1990. Bear that in mind. Like, they were a highly rated family sitcom that happened to be a cartoon. Anyway, the idea was basically to take the comic book, which had Kiss as superheroes, and then turn it into a film, said Gene. And I believe it's noted that they essentially have the same powers in the film, or they're trying to portray the band as having the same powers in the film as they had in the Marvel comic. An oft-repeated quote from Paul Stanley is that it was sold to us, in a nutshell, as a cross between Star Wars and the Beatles' Hard Day's Night. And it turned out to be nothing like either of them. They didn't have a clue what the theory or practice of acting was, says Paul. We were never coached, and nobody helped us with the script. We literally read through it one day at a table reading, then would shoot it a day or two later. If we completed our lines without making a mistake, it was a take. If we managed that, it was good enough. That was all that mattered. Gene would say that the director would typically film a scene and then ask the band members how they thought it went. What did we know, he said. They basically shot around us because we were the stars. When it comes to the release of this picture, of course, very disappointing for Kiss themselves that in America it was only a TV movie. But funny enough, outside of America, it was released theatrically under a variety of different names, depending on the translation. Like in some countries, it was Kiss Phantoms, like in Italy. It was sometimes shown as Attack of the Phantoms. And evidently, the theatrical versions that were being shown outside the U.S. were a lot different than the American version, with several scenes that didn't even appear in the final cut of the TV version. As far as releases on physical media, I know there was a couple of VHS releases in the 1980s. There was a Laserdisc release in 1991. And then in 2005, some distributor called Cheesy Flicks attempted to release the original TV version on DVD, but there was legal issues there, and disc got yanked, though there was a few copies out there here and there. Of course, I'm sure comic book conventions all through the 80s and 90s and to this day have copies of it, probably available on eBay as well on a burned disc. But the best you can hope for a digitally released version of this that was official was Kissology Volume 2, 1978 to 91, which was the second in a 3-disc DVD set. Not a set, rather, but a sequence of releases they put out in the 2000s. And I think it was probably genius for Kiss to put that on that set of discs because – of course, not a lot of Peter, Chris, and Ace Frehley era fans are going to want the second volume of Kissology. They're not going to want the 80s stuff, which is predominantly what is on that disc, right? Those performances. They were going to buy one. Maybe they'll buy three if they want the reunion stuff. But putting that on Kissology Volume 2, pretty damn clever and admirable, I would say. But here's the thing. It is known as the European edit. And doesn't that sound very cosmopolitan? Well, the European edit is apparently missing a lot of stuff, most notably Ace Frehley's scenes. So that would have pissed you off. If you're a fan of Ace and you bought, to be a completist, you bought that second set, right? And you didn't even get to see most of his wacky stuff in that film. Speaking of Ace, when this was released originally in Australia under the title Kiss and the Attack of the Phantoms, it was really popular there. Noticeably, there was a big difference in parts of the soundtrack, as in the fact that Ace's solo hit song New York Groove was played during a rampage through the park scene. Now, when Kiss, or I guess fake robot Kiss, plays in front of a big crowd of people at Magic Mountain in this film, and they sing their never before heard by the Kiss audience song Rip and Destroy, clearly to the tune of Hotter Than Hell, which Paul wrote in this trailer during a break, the lyrics for. These were people that had showed up because they were made aware of the chance to see Kiss at Magic Mountain by listening to a local AM station called KTNQ, where the real Don Steele was a very supportive presence for Kiss among the disc jockey staff. He's the same person that had Kiss on his own show when they were down there recording a live 2 at the Forum and trying to promote that. So pays off to have friends, doesn't it? And those tickets were free. And one of the young people that got a free ticket for that show was 16-year-old Art Alexakis from the band Everclear, or when he would grow up and get older, from the band Everclear. While tripping on acid with his friends, he went there to Magic Mountain to be part of the audience for that movie's concert sequence, and realized, oh, there's a big difference between seeing Kiss as a live rock band and seeing Kiss performing and filming for a cinematographic experience. He said they would stop in the middle of songs. Paul Stanley would shriek, "Oh, yeah!" And then, wait a minute. Okay, kids, let's try that again. And then he'd get right back into character. And let me point out two things about Rip and Destroy. I say performing in front of a crowd. Well, the actual recording of the performance of Rip, and Destroy were not in front of the audience. I guess the audience mostly got just a fairly standard Kiss concert for all to themselves, maybe with a few reshoots or a few run-throughs of the same song a couple times, and had to be a lot of fun. And they had to, sort of act a bit. They had to do some crowd reaction shots where people are angry at Kiss because they're being cheated and they're being provoked into rioting by these evil Kiss impersonator robots, right? And I noticed on Rip and Destroy, there's a very obvious weirdness when it comes to the chorus being sung. When you cut to footage of the faces of Gene and Ace singing along in harmony, their voices are singing ahead of the rhythm of the band. I mean, you couldn't be in Kiss and do that naturally on stage. Your brain would explode if you were so used to playing Hotter Than Hell for all those years, and then you just have to sing like a beat ahead or half a beat ahead or whatever the hell it is that they're doing. And I can only assume that the reason for that is because the visual editing was done before the audio recording of the vocal track. That's the only thing that makes any sense, because the visual of them singing Rip, and Destroy when they cut away from Paul and then, to the Gene shot, their mouths are moving faster than the band is. When they cut back to Paul's singing straight on, you've got it in the palm of your hand, or whatever the line is that he responds to that chant with, that responds to the harmony with. So his video is lined up with the beat and the rhythm of the song, so his audio is as well. I'm assuming that was just something that nobody cared enough to fix after they had edited the film, and they just forced the band to go in there and record that bit. Basically, in line with the whole theme of this operation, which is make Kiss seem dumber than maybe they are. Like, whether by accident or for real. Just by accident or from negligence, I would say. I don't think anyone was out to make this bad on purpose. Unless you ask certain people when it comes to the performances of Peter Criss and Ace Frehley. The screenwriters, Jan Michael Sherman and Don Boudet, I guess, spent time with each member of KISS to try to get a feel for how they act and how they speak. And when he was being interviewed or talked to or prodded at, Ace would just say, ack. And as a result of that, the writers were like, all right, well, we're not going to write anything for him except for ack. That's what he gets. I always thought that was I misunderstood in the past and thought that like that's all Ace would say on the set. Nope. Turns out that's all he said in the preliminary interviews. So that's all that was written in for him. Not all, mostly. Obviously, he's got lines in the movie that are not ack, insufficient data, star child, things like that. But those were written for him after he saw the script and got angry about ack being the only thing he had to say. Okay, he had to fight for, normal expository dialogue that he has or conversational dialogue that he has. He had to sort of argue to get that written in after the fact. Peter and Ace were kind of half in the bag for most of the filming of their own admission. Partying all the way through that shoot was one way Peter Criss put it when he was interviewed about it in the early 2000s. And they had to wait so long to just get to set and do their lines that they didn't see the point in just sitting around and not, getting tore up. So that's what they did. And the dialogue for Peter Criss also was dubbed in by actor Michael Bell, who had worked in the past with Joseph Barbera on a number of projects, because according to Paul Stanley and presumably others, but I've heard this in an interview with Paul, Peter didn't show up to do the after recording of dialogue, which is a common thing in television and film. When you're on location, you're outdoors, there's all kinds of sounds that can get into the microphone. You can't always use, you don't usually get an isolated vocal track in the moment. So you go into a studio later and you watch your mouth move on a screen and try to match up the delivery of the original line with that. He claims that Peter just didn't show up to work for that kind of stuff, so he doesn't get his speaking voice in there. That's how it is. Peter Criss denies that. He says he went to all the looping, all the recording sessions for that, and someone just didn't like his voice, and because they just had something against him, and they took it out and replaced him with somebody else. Now let's talk some more about Ace's point of view. He seems to be the most well-adjusted and least disappointed in this film himself when it comes to looking back. He says, I remember it very well. I had a lot of fun. When we started shooting at Magic Mountain, they closed the park at 6 o'clock, so I had the run of the place. I bought a moped and used to drive around all those asphalt trails between the rides. I crashed a few times, but luckily I had that costume on with all the padding and I didn't get hurt. Sounds like a blast, right? Sounds like the inspiration for like everything Dimebag Darrell did if you're a Pantera fan when he was not on stage. He said the whole experience for him was pretty good. There was one day, he says, that I really kind of lost it. And that was when I had a fight with the producer. What happened was I was partying the night before. This is not, this is not how your average professional actor would approach a situation like this. They would say, I got a lot of rest because it was an important day the next day for filming, and I wanted to do my best and not get worn out and not have to redo a bunch of takes. But he's like, hey, I had to get, Ace is like, I had to get up at 7 o'clock after a whole night of partying. So he's maybe he's got like an hour and a half of sleep, and that's not really sleep. If you're drunk or doing whatever else besides being drunk, your brain is not, healing during that time. Your body's not healing during that time. I'm not a doctor, but he said, had to drive to Magic Mountain at 7 o'clock. Then we had to put on our makeup and costumes and stuff. I had the day's shooting schedule, and I was supposed to start shooting around 10:30, 11 o'clock. All of a sudden, somebody knocks on the door and says, excuse me, Mr. Frehley, we're going to be doing close-ups on Gene Simmons all morning, and we won't need you until after lunch. That happened more than once. But the second time it happened, I just lost my temper. I ran into the producer's office and said, this shit's not going to fly with me. You get your shit together. If you want me here at 9 o'clock in makeup, you better make sure you got your shooting schedule right. Because nobody wants to sit around in that makeup and costume for 12 hours. I lost it. I jumped into my Mercedes and took off. And hey, I mean, if you're the director and the producer, at least you got 3 other guys to shoot while you're doing this stuff. And hey, I think he's kind of right, isn't he? Get your schedule figured out, dude. I know that's what happens on all movies anyway, but it still sucks. I think they get spoiled by just dealing with actors. They don't realize normal human beings don't take that shit. Anyways, he actually says, well, Paul and Gene have gone on record that they hate the film. But Ace says, I think it's hysterical. I think it's campy, and I think it's a silly rock and roll movie. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. They took the film so goddamn seriously that it just ruined it for them when they saw the final cut because they expected Gone with the Wind. And Paul has said, yeah, at the premiere, he was, halfway down in his seat trying to figure out a way to sneak out of the whole theater without being seen. But of course, that was impossible, so he was trapped. Now, to tell a little bit more of Peter's side of things, he remembers that at that time in 78, I was doing cocaine and drinking and getting crazy. I remember how hard it was getting up at 6 in the morning and being in makeup at 8. And they would cake it on, putting on 3 or more layers. So if you wanted to rest, you couldn't. If you moved your head, you'd mess it all up again. And I didn't like the waiting. We were getting so used to getting on stage and going at it. No one told us we were going to be sitting for a long time. For me, I'm such a hyper guy. I'd go in, and the minute the makeup was on, I'd break open a beer and start partying. Now, when Peter wasn't actually filming on set, he says, we had broads in our trailer, 6, 7 broads at a time. We were just animals. So I assume he's talking about him and Ace for the most part because they were buddies there partying together while Gene and Paul were off being upset at them somewhere else on the set. Al Ross would say, it was very stressful for the band. There was conflict on every day of the film shoot. For Gene and Paul, this was the ultimate thing they could be doing, to be on the big screen. But Ace and Peter, psychologically or subconsciously, thought all it was going to do was keep this Kiss thing going. I think it was time for them to get out. The fact that Kiss's ballad Beth was such a big hit inflamed Peter's ego. Peter took the lead vocal on Beth, and from that point on, all he wanted to do was put on a tuxedo and go play Las Vegas like Frank Sinatra. Another interview confirms that it was Peter and Ace together partying. He says, Peter says, the whole thing about partying, with lots of women in their trailer, every day, loaded with beer from the fridge that was always restocked. They were having sex with women in the back, in the front, in the bathrooms of their trailers, going crazy. He said, so I was exhausted, and maybe my voice did sound like shit. I think whoever they got to replace me just blew it. At least they could have gotten a guy who sounds closer to me than that. I got so many letters from Kiss fans saying, what the fuck is this? How dare this guy use someone else's voice? Speaking of people not being portrayed by the same person you would expect, of course, there's some obvious shots in this film where the spaceman, the space ace, is being portrayed by a gentleman of African-American descent. And that's his stuntman that was mostly intended, I would assume, for wider shots, farther away shots in the nighttime at this outdoor park where they were shooting. And, one of those days that we referred to earlier that Ace got angry and yelled at the producer or the director and stormed off and got in his Mercedes and left. And yes, Mr. Alan Olney, his stunt double, would come in to do those scenes. He would later go on to also double for Eddie Murphy and Wesley Snipes, among many, many others. And keeping with the theme of Ace looking back on this having a laugh, I mean, you can tell he's not angry about that. He knows, he seems to be aware that they just moved on without him and made some reckless decisions about how to film those scenes. Because he didn't even go back to watch it, in order to sort of talk about this. He says, so my stuntman stood in for me. There was a close-up shot, and you can definitely tell that it's not me. When he gets knocked against the wall by Dracula or somebody, if you freeze frame it, it's obvious that is not me. He refers to that as that scene in The Haunted Place. Some quotes from Gene around this whole production says, it was interesting to make, and also it was a learning curve. It taught me that the next time somebody said, don't worry, it'll be fine, that you should still roll up your sleeves and stick your nose into it just to make sure. Because when the movie or anything comes out with your name on it, ultimately, you're responsible for it. So it was interesting to do, but I don't think it's a very good movie. Years later, in the early 2000s, he would say, Kiss meets the Phantom of the Park, a classic movie. If you're on drugs. It did huge ratings, though. All kinds of Kiss fans loved it, and I'm sure it was a new crop of younger kids that were getting into Kiss that went bonkers for it. And the older guard, that had been there since the earlier days, maybe the Hotter Than Hell days onward, or the Alive One days onward, that were getting older, getting out of high school or getting into their 20s. Maybe this is that sort of sign for them, like, okay, they're becoming kids stuff, and I'm going to go, I don't know, listen to Kansas or Genesis. I don't know. I don't know what you do. Become a banker. It's clear I've never done any of those three things. The aforementioned Al Ross, who was at that time the vice president of Aucoin Management. Bill Aucoin was the manager for Kiss in their business dealings and their plannings and comings and goings in general. Maybe not their daily road manager guy. He's the big picture guy, and here's the deals we're going to make kind of guy. Al says, the film was originally going to be shown in theaters. Then it turned into a TV movie. In the very beginning, it was looked upon as a low-budget job, and that's not what it was supposed to be. So everyone was sort of sold one thing, and then they started work, apparently, and it was worked on by people who knew it was going to be a low-budget TV movie. Kiss didn't find out, right up front about that. The late Joseph Barbera says, we went out to film the concert at the park, and there were 30,000 people there. They had their set, which was worth $1 million, and when they did their songs, it was incredible. So according to him, it's 30,000 people. According to Wikipedia, it's 8,000. For the record, I am taking my sources from the Paul Stanley, A Life Exposed book here that I'll read a little bit from in a second. I'm pulling from Wikipedia. I'm pulling from the Kiss Story book. I'm pulling from A Little Weird, which is another book that also it's about Kiss, but it's also about Cheap Trick. And then I'm getting into some stuff from Kiss Behind the Mask by Ken Sharp and David Leaf, as well as loudersound.com's interview with them about it, and the old When Kiss Ruled the World VH1 special that you can find on YouTube now. The beginning of the chapter where Paul covers the making of Kiss Meets the Phantom in his own book, Face the Music, A Life Exposed, he starts with, one of Bill's follies was the movie Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. He's talking about Bill Aucoin, the aforementioned manager. He goes into that experience, talking about how disappointed they were when they found out that these like wires that would levitate boxes and things were not taken out by special effects, which is what they thought was going to happen. They were disappointed that like all they were able to do was just repeat lines that were fed to them right before every take. So they would just one line at a time be told, okay, you're going to say, gee, Ace, we better get out of here. And Paul would say, gee, Ace, we better get out of here. And then, all right, next line, that kind of a thing. He talks about how disappointing it was that during the filming of the live concert footage, that presumably the part where the audience wasn't there, the rip and destroy footage, he's on stage doing his thing and then turns around and sees an old man in a Peter Criss wig and Peter Criss makeup sitting behind the drums. Not actually playing the song so much, just some stand-in guy. He talks about, their next folly after this was Bill Aucoin telling Ace that he didn't have to leave the band. The band could all just do solo albums instead and keep it all together. And admittedly, when we talk about the relationships within the band at this time, it's not just a rift between people that are using drugs and partying and drinking too much and the two guys that supposedly aren't, because there's a rift now between Paul and Gene as well. And Gene admits that he was totally seduced by fame at that time. He had started seeing Cher publicly and being in magazines with her and TV shows with her and loving the Hollywood scene and being a part of that away from the band. A lot of Kiss fans didn't like that. They didn't like, this sort of sellout to Hollywood, to the elite, when they were supposed to be the underdogs and like working class, even though they were, crazy monsters and stuff. They somehow would be more relatable if Gene wasn't traipsing around Tinseltown with Cher on his arm. And Gene also admits that Paul never really came to him directly to intervene or tell him he was screwing up the image of the band by doing this. He said Paul was was too much of my friend to do that. He would go to Bill a coin, and then Bill would sit me down and read me the riot act and tell me, you're fucking this up with your whole nightlife and Hollywood obsession. Paul talks about him being worried enough about Peter's behavior to try to convince him to go in to get some therapy. Peter refusing. Paul says Peter's more the type of guy to like walk along the edge of a building and not come in and protect himself when you ask him to. And so Paul's giving ultimatums, and when Peter refuses his help in that form, Paul says, I told him I didn't want anything to do with him from then on out. So that's not going to be great for the overall health of the band's dynamic. So the whole experience of making the film took the tensions that were already there between the members of the band and made them way worse. Everybody was unhappy with each other and unhappy with the situation they were individually in at that time. Now, they had made a Marvel comic book, become superheroes, and then made a movie where they were superheroes, and the public was eating it up. The next thing to come out of all this, apparently, was that they topped the Gallup polls as the most popular band in America multiple years in a row. So they were invited to New Orleans to be the Grand Marshals of Mardi Gras. The quote is, "We would ride around in specifically built Kiss floats and toss Kiss coins into the crowd, and we couldn't wait to do it. And then the cops went on strike, and then it was over before it began." There's a newspaper cutout about this, Saturday, November 18, 1978, from, I don't know, a newspaper called the States Item. I'm not sure exactly what city this was published in, but it's by Alan Katz. And he says, "Kiss, an internationally famed rock group that sets off its music with bizarre makeup and wild costumes, will parade with the crew of Endymion on February 24th. That's Endymion. I've never been to Mardi Gras. I don't know how to pronounce any of that stuff. Sorry. The 4 members of KISS will serve as grand marshals for the 40-float Endymion parade that rolls that Saturday before Mardi Gras. Okay, so it's before the Mardi Gras festivities. There's 40 different floats. Wow. All 4 members of the group, Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, Peter Criss, and Ace Frehley, will appear in full regalia on one of Endymion's 13 mini floats. Okay, so there's 13 other floats besides the 40, I guess? The rock stars will also be guests of honor in the Endymion dinner dance at the River Gate following the parade. A record crowd of more than 9,000 persons will attend the post-parade party. How do they know that's going to happen? Did they have tickets? And Endymion spokesmen say all tickets have been sold out. Okay, that's how. A spokesman for the crew, Krewe. Now I know why that band called Mystic Crew of Clearlight was spelled Krewe. It had Jimmy Bower in it from I Hate God and Down. They were all instrumental, and they opened for COC one time in Seattle. Damn, they were good. With Nebula, that was also great. Anyways, a spokesman for the crew, Krewe, said that the KISS appearance at Mardi Gras, the makeup and costumes of KISS are perfect fit with the fun, frivolity, make-believe jubilation of New Orleans Carnival. Endymion, which has grown in recent years to become the carnival's largest crew, Krewe, with some 850 riders and one of the showcase parades of the carnival season, maybe, is expected to announce soon other celebrity riders, including the cast of a highly rated television show and performers for the post-parade gala. I wonder what that show was. The Endymion Parade, which police last year said drew crowds of about 400,000, will feature 27 king-size floats, along with 13 smaller floats. Okay, so that's the 40 total. Also on hand will be 35 marching bands. Damn, that's a lot of marching bands to take in one day. In 1976, Alice Cooper, another rock star who leans to bizarre makeup and costumes, was Grand Marshal of Endymion. I wonder if the police went on strike before or after they knew KISS was going to be the Grand Marshals. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine New Orleans in the late 70s? Mardi Gras parade and no cops. 400,000 people going berserk. And probably people coming from other parts of the country, more so than usual, to see KISS. And then no cops in the streets. Damn, dude. So let me confess that I was not able to find a really very legal version or way or method of watching this film, but I did end up finding it posted on Facebooky from a fan who I won't name so they don't get the thing taken down. But it's funny to look at the comments from about a year ago when people were reacting to this post of his. Someone named Edgar Bauer said, "Thank you for posting this original version of the movie. The Kissology DVD has the two funniest parts cut out of it. Those are Ace's great lines of Beethoven's Fifth at 47 and 20 seconds, and She Wants a Rocket Ride at 1 hour 10 and 45 seconds. I always wondered why they cut those two lines out of the DVD. Gene and Paul probably had something to do with it. Jealousy?" And there's a very long response from somebody trying to be helpful who I won't name, but he's super enthusiastic, and he writes as follows. "Well, hello to you, Edgar Bauer, sir. Edgar, sir, you may already do know, or you may already do not know. When this movie was released back on October 28, 1978 on NBC, Kiss and their then business manager, Bill Aucoin, only put the current Kiss music from 1977 to 78 into the film. When then the film was released on NBC here in North America for the domestic release. When Kiss and Bill Aucoin released this film in Japan in the same year of 1978, it was renamed Kiss and the Attack of the Phantoms, '(S). If you can't tell, I'm reading this exactly as he's typed it. And it was featured in the Japanese film theaters, '(S), semicolon. Plus, Bill Aucoin decided to change only the music list in this Japanese release to promote the Kisses solo LPs. But the concert music performance songs remain the same. I Stole Your Love, Black Diamond, the ending only, Shout It Out Loud, Rock and Roll All Night, and God of Thunder, ending credit, '(S), of the film and domestic release only. Edgar, sir, on Kissology film, Volume 2, this film is the Japanese release. As to why it's renamed Kiss and the Attack of the Phantoms, and you will hear different Kiss songs through this film, but the concert songs, '(S), are still the same as the domestic release, but minus God of Thunder. Plus, there is added extra film footage in the Japanese release than there is in the domestic release. Wow! That is wow in quotes, in all caps and spaces between the words, the letters in the quotes. 3 exclamation points. Believe it or not! 3 exclamation points. I saw the documentary of how this film was made. Well, there you go, Edgar, sir, from person's name. And for now, then there's a photo of a very, very dapper-looking dude with a long gray beard all bound up and long hair pulled back in a ponytail, sitting on a rooftop in a metropolitan area with a large black and white umbrella above his head so he doesn't get sunburned, I guess. And there's no responses to it except for a reaction, a wow reaction that you can do on Facebook. And that was placed there by Kevin Ross Kuhn himself, reacting to his own comments. I just thought, hey, if I'm throwing in all these contradictory stories, different opinions of different people that worked with Kiss and hung out on the set and did their things, why not someone that sounds like as much of an expert as anybody else? But also, it's not lost on me that this falls into the same category as most lengthy, enthusiastic comment responses on social media, especially ones with lots of phrases and words in all capital letters, in that, if you'll notice, the response does not at all address the original question that was being posed about why Ace's dialogue had been removed and who may have removed it. Do not look for answers anywhere, except here on my show. Now, back to the point, which is I have never seen this movie before. I've heard what Kiss had to say about it a long time ago, of course, and figured it was, worthy of being written off and ignored. But having watched it now tonight, I'm happy to say it's very entertaining. It doesn't drag at any point. It's written by professionals, albeit professionals who are probably just used to writing Scooby-Doo episodes. And that's what it seems. It's like an hour and a half Scooby-Doo episode plot structure with Kiss instead of, the Scooby Gang rolling around in the Mystery Machine. And nothing boring ever happens in it, really. There was a lot of fun surprises. I didn't expect Kiss to go one-on-one into a martial arts battle with 7 people. There's glowing swords and karate fighting techniques and sumo looking things happening. I don't know if this was intentional and manipulative on and very controlling on Gene's part, or if it just happened this way. But Gene's lines, half of them are just him opening his mouth and the sound of a lion roar coming out of his face. But he's in a band and I guess ostensibly a supernatural cosmic fighting force with a person they keep calling the Catman, whose face is painted like a cat. And he doesn't get any of that action. He doesn't get any cool, crazy monster or animal noises coming out of himself. He just has a very smooth, authoritative, masculine voice, unlike that of Peter Criss. And if you love Ace Frehley, this movie freaking rules, too, because he just gets to be the comic relief. He gets to crack wise the whole time, look cool, whoop some ass, and be the sort of transportation power module for the group when they need to escape somewhere. And he's got glowing fists when he hits people and stuff. It's very cool. If you love Paul, you're going to love Paul no matter what. And you'll probably think he's, super sexy in this because he gets to run around like Paul would look when he runs around in an action movie and say things with his pouty face. that the way Paul would say them, if he was a cosmic superhero. And Gene's, rad. Gene's dark and monstery the whole time. Even when the others are just sitting up normally, he's hunched over and like a gargoyle. He looks awesome. If you were a kid and you loved Kiss and this came out, I mean, how frustrated would you be that you could never watch it again after this? I mean, you didn't know that VCRs would be invented later, or that they already had been invented, and eventually your family might be able to afford one in about 5 to 10 years, depending on who your family was. You didn't know YouTube was going to be around later. If I was a White Zombie fan when I was 11 instead of when I was 16, and there was a White Zombie movie that came on ABC, at night on a Sunday near Halloween or whenever the heck it was, I would never stop watching it if I had the choice. Rock and Roll High School is an amazing movie with the Ramones in it, but the Ramones don't show up for they don't do much in the film for the whole first half of it. It's all about these, teenage kids trying to make out or win an ASB election or save the school or blow up the school. I forget. All I remember about that was the Ramones and how cool they are. Gonna have to watch that one again before I do my Ramones episode, obviously. By the way, Ramones note, when the tribute to the Ramones came out that Rob Zombie put together back in the early 2000s, it was Johnny Ramone that said in, I believe, a separate interview, not the liner notes for the CD, that he thought Kiss were the only artists on the entire compact disc release that actually improved a Ramones song. Kiss did Do You Remember Rock and Roll Radio? And it was pretty damn stunning. I'll take them both. Now, one of my favorite podcasters and comedians is Dana Gould. He has a regular series of Halloween episodes I go back to repeatedly, even though I've heard them before year after year, like you would go back to a great, Christmas special. And on, I believe, his first Halloweenery episode, he had this to say about Kiss meets the Phantom of the Park.
And the interesting thing about it was, as I've cited on this podcast many times, Paul Stanley's speaking voice, which many Kiss fans were not privy to prior to that, when they're all sitting around the pool, and suddenly it's like, Demon Starchild. Terry and Aline are stuck on the Ferris wheel.
Wait a minute.
We really need to find our talismans and save them.
No, wait a minute.
And that is a spot-on impression.
Wait a minute.
As I said, I'm not here to be reverential about this whole thing. Doesn't mean Kiss don't rule. Now, since I mentioned earlier how the comic book experience was sort of part one and the filmmaking experience was sort of part two of, trying to get the Kiss brand and the Kiss ideas out of just, the band touring and recording and merchandising into, all of America's brains, I feel it is relevant to go back and talk a little bit about that comic book experience. Quote from Stan Lee, Marvel Comics editor-in-chief and, emeritus president for a while. He had various titles, but in the 1960s, he was the head writer. He was an editor as well. He was the creator of most of the Marvel Universe alongside or in partnership with Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and other, very important artists. But those are the ones that were, there with the defining designs at the time for the main characters when it came to the Fantastic Four, the Hulk, Spider-Man, Black Panther, Avengers, Iron Man, all kinds of stuff that was very, very risky to do at the time it was done. It was very against the grain comic book wise. So he's a big hero of Gene Simmons in particular. So Stan Lee says, Gene Simmons is one of the biggest comic fans. He contacted us, and we decided to do a comic book Kiss. Me and the guys from Kiss had to drive to Buffalo because we were doing some sort of publicity stunt there, where the band poured their own blood into the printer's ink. So we landed in Buffalo, and there was a police escort to take us to a printing plant. I couldn't get over this because there were two motorcycle policemen and these nuts in costume in the back seat of the limousine, and the cops were stopping traffic at every intersection so that we could go for our publicity gig. All I could think about was that there was probably doctors riding somewhere to an emergency operation or people with important business things, and they're stopping at the intersection so that Kiss can do their publicity. I thought, this really says something about the human condition in America. Every minute, Gene Simmons would say, Stan, do you remember that story you did in 1964? Do you remember when you wrote on page 12, panel 3? He goes on to say, it was really the first comic book of its kind. The difference in those earlier comic books is that they all were aimed at children. The Kiss comic was aimed at the real audience of the band. It was a leap for comic books at the time. The first rock and roll comic that Marvel ever did was the Kiss book. In fact, it established a whole line of similar comics. It was the first magazine-sized comic done in color, and it was a real fight to get it done that way. Pause for a second from your narrator. Yeah, there was a lot of magazine-sized comics that were just black and white. The original Punisher run for his sort of solo stories that came out of his popularity from appearing in the Amazing Spider-Man, the early defining run before his 80s miniseries with all the Mike Zeck covers was all black and white. I really wish I could find those and get some sort of readable copy of those goddamn things, because I don't know that they've been collected in a graphic novel ever. Anyway, Stan says it was a real fight to get it done that way. It had to be approached like we were publishing a rock and roll magazine because it was going to be out there on stands with all the other rock magazines. Well, that's a great point marketing-wise. They're trying to get their comics in front of new eyeballs, people that don't go to the newsstand and look at the comics rack, right? This is before comic book stores were their own thing. This is when you bought comic books at a drugstore or at a news stand with other magazines and newspapers and things. But they were always in their own section because they were a different size than all those publications. And I know if you're older than me, you already know this. But some people listening might be younger than me, possibly, maybe. I don't know. Let's see, where was I? There was no reason for anyone to buy it if it didn't look as good as any of the other magazines. Music magazines, especially. In that sense, it had to be something spectacular. It had to be something to just leap off the stands at you. That's why I used the metallic ink, and we did the red hellish cover. Laughs. This is going to sound unbelievable to any comic book fan, But they didn't want to do that because they told me nobody's going to pay $1.50 for a comic book. We used metallic ink on the cover for the KISS logo. I think it was the first time that had ever been done. It was the first time I had ever written a comic book on living human beings. Laughs. That was different. Now, Gene Simmons says Sean Delaney had a lot to do with that comic. He wrote some of the story. There was a trial run. Sean wrote a 2-page comic strip for Cream magazine where we were semi-superheroic kind of guys. Marvel Comics put us in a Howard the Duck comic where Howard the Duck was possessed by KISS. That sounds fucking awesome. I want that. I need to find this. Holy smokes. If you've only ever known of Howard the Duck because of the movie from like 86 or 87, there was a lot of fun comic books in the 70s with Howard that sort of established his character. And he pops up in the Marvel Comics, from time to time. I'm not an expert on his history. I just know that what little tiny bits of him I've seen have been very entertaining and wacky and silly and irreverent and fun. So Gene says, it also happened to be a very big seller for them, so they thought, we've got something here. I insisted that we don't just do a comic book. I told everyone it's got to be $1.50 comic book. I'd rather do it in magazine style. So you don't have to go to the comic book section because lots of fans don't want to read comic books. I'd rather be next to Time magazine. So reluctantly, Marvel went along with it. Those 2 KISS Marvel comic books were their biggest sellers for 20 years. That might be true. Speaking as your narrator, I don't know if Marvel Comics would come out and say that. I mean, that's 20 years is a long freaking time. Now, there's a lot more about the making of that comic book in other parts of Behind the Mask, the official authorized biography by David Leaf and Ken Sharp. Some other voices in there talk about what went into the writing and the promotion of it. Highly recommend it. I can't recommend this book enough. I'm sure if you listen to all my podcasts on KISS, you're going to hear me say that multiple times. And they do talk about the talismans of the magic talismans that are given to KISS in the comics that give them sort of their superhero powers. And of course, that is what they're using in the film as well. So it is sort of a continuation of what they set up in the comic book, as previously noted. Now, I had a quote earlier from Mr. Joseph Barbera, but here's a little more of his take on the whole thing, because he's not in rock and roll. So compared to what he was used to doing, cartoons and live action, kind of kids show stuff, if you think about like stuff like the Banana Splits, that was probably more of the extent of the live action things that they had been doing. He says, it was a heck of a picture. KISS me. I don't know. This is how he talks. I'm gonna go into old timey showbiz guy voice because I want to. This is my show. Damn it! It was a heck of a picture. KISS meets the Phantom of the Park was really another version of the Phantom of the Opera. We had this demented genius living down in the bowels of the amusement park, and he created all these animatronics. That's right. They're obsessed with animatronics in this movie. Like it's the evil villain's whole thing. It's his whole job. And he's like, oh, it's going to take away all the need for human beings to have menial jobs and do manual labor someday when we get animatronics working better. And feel the skin on this one. It's just indistinguishable from real human skin. And you can't watch that nowadays without thinking, yeah, we do keep making those, don't we? But it's only for relieving human beings of certain physical tasks, right? Animatronic human figures suck. They're terrible. They're awful. They're unnerving. They've always been that way. I don't care about the Hall of Presidents. I don't care about the Bears Jamboree. I don't care about any of that creepy, weird stuff. It's not cool. It's not fun. It's not lifelike. But this 70s stuff, maybe I'm weirded out more because I just got done watching The House That Dripped Blood with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. There's a whole part of that movie with these wax museum dolls that are supposed to be so lifelike and unnerving and scary, and it's not. I don't get where this. I don't know. It's before cartoons got really good and computers got really good. I guess that animatronics and wax figures were a big deal. And I was watching this movie, the Phantom of the Park, watching the animatronic creatures or characters doing their little routines in sequence, and I thought maybe this has more to do with the generation that grew up with wind-up toys and tin soldiers with little keys in the backs, right? Because a lot of their toys were, full of gears and springs, and it was a wild thing to have toys that would sort of walk around on their own, but they're made out of little blocks of wood and crap. I don't know. But back to Joseph Barbera. When Kiss set up to do a concert there, the professor, saw it as a distinct threat to him. So he wanted to destroy them, and that's how the story went. Gordon Hessler directed the film. He used to do a lot of pictures for AIP, American International Pictures, which was a lot of Roger Corman's films, which fucking ruled. Super low budget, super garish and scary and, violent and stuff when it was trendy to do so, depending on the subject matter. Pretty scary horror films. It was a heck of a show, and Kiss were terrific people to work with. We went out to film the concert at Magic Mountain Amusement Park, and there were 30,000 people there. They had their set, which was worth $1 million. When they did their songs, it was incredible. Another part of the film I loved was when these white monkeys started climbing up the roller coaster. They were wonderful people to work with. The monkeys? The monkeys are Kiss. That scene, I couldn't, at first I thought, they're monkey-headed people in white, furry suits. And then I saw them in another angle. I thought, they're cat people in white furry suits. And then I saw them in another angle. I thought, they're Wolfman people in white furry suits. I don't know what those, but they're robots. It was a big fight scene with lots of Kiss superpower special effects. It's amazing to behold. If you don't watch the whole movie, look for that part. Look for the fight on the roller coaster. Look for the martial arts battle in the sort of dungeony part of the bowels of Magic Mountain's laboratory, where there's all this crazy mad scientist equipment, for the villain to just do weird, wacky experiments and control the entire park at his fingertips. He gets to turn things on and off whenever he wants to, and it's bizarre. Peter Criss says in his commentary on the Detroit Rock City film that when they made Kiss Meets the Phantom, he was totally in awe of that actor who plays the mad scientist. He refers to him as Anthony something. Yeah, that's right. I went all the way back to the Detroit Rock City film commentary on my DVD because I know the guy that interviewed all the band members of Kiss for their commentary tracks for separate interviews on the film. Asked them all about how Detroit Rock City as a film would contrast with Kiss's involvement in Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. And it was Peter Criss that said, the beginning of the making of the Phantom, was exciting, and they were all thrilled to be around like a real director and real actors and real sets and everything. And then he, mentioned of Anthony something being a good actor that really knocked him out. That is Anthony Zerbe, spelled Zerbe. I apologize if I mispronounce it. Al Ross of Acoin Management says he was a marvelous actor, but the casting of the guy and the girl was less than spectacular, meaning the young male and female leads, I assume. But let's get back to more of Peter's mindset. And now this is not Peter in the day. This is Peter looking back later. He wanted to set the record straight on a few things, and I feel like his voice is something that should be heard here, so we get a full picture of how everybody was feeling. He says, Paul didn't really play the acoustic guitar in the scene where Beth is played in the film. It was done by a studio musician. I was supposed to fake playing the guitar, but I was so sloppy with the finger work that Paul jumped in and said, I'll do it. And that sounds pretty typical of the sort of Paul and Peter relationship at the time, I think. Peter's fucking up. Paul's the first guy to go, I've got a solution, right? That's productive. Overall, that's helpful. It's not sensitive, but if you're too fucked up to play the fucking guitar, drummer, maybe one of the guitar players should do it. But Peter says Ace really should have done it. That's when we really started battling each other. On that movie, we were battling already. I don't remember going back into the studio singing it. When it comes to his speaking voice in the film, he says he'll never know why it wasn't used in this interview. They said my voice stunk. Hey, man, I could pick up a phone and call somebody for something, and they could pick up the phone and know it's me right away. I know no one has a voice like mine. You know Ace the minute you pick up the phone. I can imitate him so well, I can almost fool people that I'm Ace at times. Well, then that sort of devalues the point you just made about Ace's voice, right? Because it's so original, is what you're trying to say, like yours. Now, as to the band saying he didn't show up for looping, and that's why he's not in the finished product, he says, that's bullshit. I went to all the looping. I went to all the fucking shit I had to go to. Yes, I was stoned all the time. So was Ace. We were both party animals at that point in our career. Now we were doubling back on things that have already been quoted in this episode. I was reading from loudersound.com, which turns out the whole article about Kiss Meets the Phantom on loudersound.com is just quotes pulled directly from Kiss Behind the Mask by David Leaf and Ken Sharp. So if you like that, just, again, buy this book. Now, what does Ace have to say about that? Ace, in the same book, says, Peter didn't even talk in the film. Laughter. Usually when you do a film, you have to go and redo some of the dialogue. You have to do looping. He never made it, so they had another actor speak his lines. Now, is that Ace really towing the line that Gene and Paul gave him to walk, told him to say it? Probably not. He also says, believe it or not, when I got the original script, I didn't have one line except for ack, which we've covered a little bit of this, but I like the details that he gives up in this part of the book. That was the only thing I would say. When I was drunk, and if I didn't want to be bothered by people, I would just go, ack, laughs. I guess they didn't think I was capable of saying any lines at the time. I was drinking a lot. I thought I pulled off my lines okay. Peter would also say, I wanted to go into acting, and when I did, I hated it. Because it wasn't the acting that I wanted. I wanted to be Al Pacino. Here's the separation. The cat is not an actor. He's a rock star. And so are those guys. They aren't actors. I hated doing the film. They didn't use my voice probably because I read the dialogue so bad. I just hated every minute of it. So, in another source, but in the same book, I assume a different interview, he concedes that he was bad at doing the job. Also, he's talked about how he was wasted until like 6, 7 in the morning. So, the day before on some of these instances. When I look at it now, I love it. My daughter just thinks it's the greatest movie she's ever seen. No one's daughter thinks this is the greatest movie they've ever seen, Peter Criss. Maybe if they're 4 and you don't let them watch what they actually want to watch, they only have to watch Kiss Meets the Phantom over and over again. I don't know. No, probably not. Maybe she's like maybe she was in her snarky teen phase and thought it was great. I mean, she really loved her dad or she really loved Kiss. I don't know. But that sounds like one of those things that just doesn't happen. He goes on to say, but it wasn't a great time for me. I was still married and I was having an affair with a woman named Deborah. And Jesus Christ, I had all my energies into this beautiful center folder. That fucking solo album was the worst of it. We should have never done that. I'll be the first member to admit that, and Ace will agree. We've all talked about this. It was the biggest mistake we ever did because we all went our own ways. We all went into this fucking musical thing that I thought could probably be a whole career for me. I didn't need these guys anymore. I had Beth. It won a People's Choice Award. Fuck this. I'm doing my own music. I freaked out. So did everyone else. I think all of us should have taken the solo album music and all of us should have played on that together. And that would have been Kiss. So if I had to redo things, I would have never done the solo albums and I would have put my brain in a different place for that movie. All right, let's unpack some of that. Hey, drummer. Let's qualify a bit of what you're saying here. The solo albums were incredibly successful for everyone except Peter. Not incredibly when it comes to like up against a regular Kiss album, but for Ace, it was a big deal. For Gene, some of those songs on his solo album were a big deal for him. He got to do some things that, he always wanted to do that he couldn't do in Kiss. For Paul, he had some songs that were a really big deal for him, and they made his star shine brighter too, just like Ace, just like Gene. I think Paul and Ace came out the best when it comes to the perception of what they were capable of as musicians and songwriters and singers. I don't think Peter Criss got a very, very nice result of the solo albums. And now let's take his alternate universe timeline into consideration. Either they were going to make a regular Kiss record, right? And Peter Criss probably would have been sidelined because he was not very reliable. Or they go into their solo albums, songwriting-wise, put together a whole bunch of compositions and say, stop, everybody, come back together. Let's make this a Kiss record instead. Do you think you're going to get an equal amount of songwriting on that album, Pete? Do you think you're going to get an equal amount of influence in that at that point? No. No. So this is a fantasy in your mind. I believe, as your fully accredited rock and roll psychologist, Peter Criss, I'm so very, very sorry. Now, in other episodes after this, I'm sure you'll hear me talk up Peter Criss a lot. I think he's an underrated performer and an underrated singer in Kiss. And I don't think other bands would have let him shine as much as Kiss did. Or let him get away with as much bad behavior as Kiss did. Now, to give voice to a couple of other people that worked for Kiss at the time, let's talk to Mr. Paul Chavaria, a roadie, part of the crew from 74 to 79. He said, "We were at the bottom of the roller coaster at Magic Mountain. It was the day we were shooting the live concert. We had this huge tarp across the back of the stage. These winds came out of nowhere and started pushing the scaffolding, almost getting ready to rip the roof down. Every one of the roadies took a utility knife, raced up to this thing, and started cutting all these bungee cables that were holding the tarp down. This tarp went flying off into the wind. It was gone. Had we not done that, it probably would have forced the roof down on the production, which might have killed the band. And no one was going to let that happen." Fierce loyalty. Not letting your employers get killed when you have a way to stop it. Admirable? Yes. Heroic? Possibly. Their publicist, Carol Kay, said, "We had a screening of Kiss Meets the Phantom with maybe 30 people in the room. We're all watching this movie, and it was very quiet. It was kind of surreal. At certain moments of the film, I remember Ace cackling in the back of the room. Ace's laugh made everybody else laugh. The film didn't turn out the way they hoped it would. Unfortunately, it wasn't another Hard Day's Night." So, now to go back to Paul and Gene's perspective, they've talked about how much they didn't like the movie when it came out, when it was done, and when they were screening it. They reportedly did not allow anyone who worked for Kiss to even mention the name of the movie around them for a good 10 years worth of time. Imagine hating what you've done, that you've sunk a bunch of money into, and you hear the lead guitarist in your band cackling like a shrieking minor bird or some sort of tropical bird, you know, the way that Ace laughs, you know, back behind you, and just hating him for it. And he's the guy that has no stakes in it. He doesn't care. He's the guy that had the most fun. He's the guy that doesn't hate the movie. The only one that doesn't hate the movie, doesn't hate the experience, because he knew he just had nothing invested in it the entire time. Man, that's just, for people like Gene and Paul, just there's a rusty fishing knife just being stabbed in their side, like grinding between their rib bones, turning and twisting, and not intentionally. I don't think, well, I don't know. I don't know Ace's mind, obviously, or his heart. I think he was just like anyone that would be totally entertained by the absurdity of it all. And the absurdity of it all really stung Gene and Paul, who thought this was going to be a whole new level to their career, whole new level to making Kiss even more of a household name than it was. but especially Gene, who's like standing at the gates of Hollywood, you know, and loving that power, loving that fame. Admittedly, I'm not telling tales out of school here. And Paul, admittedly, during these times is just obsessed with, you know, being famous, buying cars, meeting women, doing his thing, being a rock star, loving it. And I, nor anyone else, should fault either one of them for that. I think most of what they've done is pretty damn admirable, quite frankly. But on the Detroit Rock City commentary, as I said, there were leading questions for each band member to try to get them to talk about this film. Ace says nothing about it at all. Paul dodges it really fast and flips the conversation over to Detroit Rock City and how it's not even a Kiss film. It's a film about Kiss fans and stuff. Gene, on the other hand, starts out his commentary with a couple of details about Kiss, but then he goes into the fact that Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park had beat out Cleopatra in the ratings that night, which he said was the event movie. He says, you know, Phantom of the Park was a movie of the week. Cleopatra was the event movie, which I don't know what that terminology really refers to, but I assume it has something to do with the fact that Cleopatra was immensely, you know, well regarded, but made in the 60s. And it must have been debuting on television for the first time. Maybe that's what made it an event movie. And that would be something that was, you know, highly anticipated for a lot of people. I mean, that's a movie that bankrupted an entire studio, for crying out loud. I believe it was during the extended schedule of making that film that Elizabeth Taylor was arrested in Italy for the charge of sexual vagrancy or erotic. Excuse me, I think maybe it was erotic vagrancy. Someone please call in and clarify me on that. I learned that on the commentary track to The Longest Day. All this has nothing to do with Kiss, of course, but you do get the impression or the confirmation on this commentary for Detroit Rock City in the early 2000s. So many years after the Kiss Meets the Phantom and so many years after the retrospective interviews about Kiss Meets the Phantom that Gene really did like stand out among the members of the band as the only one who was ready to correct their mistake by doing another movie after Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, right? He was like, no, we're going to be proactive and we'll do better on the next one. There's no reason why we shouldn't. Good for him. Speaking of Gene, now in the scene of this film when he comes busting through a wall, or rather the robot imposter version of him comes busting through the wall and he like beats up a couple of security guards, it looks very imposing and intimidating as much as a ABC movie of the week could or CBS movie of the week could, whatever it is. And it looks dark and it's, you know, he looks imposing. And here's the music that plays while he is like stomping around and grimacing and, you know, doing things to great effect and with great weight and heaviness to them, being demonic and physically intimidating. If you don't believe me, I don't blame you. I wouldn't believe me either. But it was the 70s, folks. This is what they did. They did it to Duke Boys when they had, you know, action scenes and car chases in the Dukes of Hazzard. They did it in a lot of TV shows in the 70s. They did it to Spider-Man on the album they made. That I'll have to cover in some other episode someday. Spider-Man solo record sounded like this. But yeah, there's the lion roar. There's Gene's lion roar. But yeah, that funky Starsky and Hutch type music or whatever it would be. I mean, I can't nail it down to any one show. It was all over the late 70s. You just had to have that. whenever anything literally happened at any time in a television program that was on prime time. All right, folks, I think that's the most I'm going to have to say about about Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. There's going to be a lot more Kiss coming up in small doses because there's just too many things to talk about that I can't cover all in one thing. I just did a 3-hour Misfits episode, and there's another 2 to 3 hours on that band coming up pretty soon. So I was never going to get the Kiss thing done if I wanted to do their whole story at once. Now we're going to cover Detroit Rock City at some point, one of what I think is one of the best rock and roll movies ever. But we also will pepper things on our road to Kiss historical wonderment with mentions of episodes of The Incredible Hulk, Quantum Leap, and The Love Boat, as well as Chips, that all have Kiss connotations. Thanks for being here. Thanks for loving rock and roll. Thanks for loving old movies. I really appreciate having someone to talk to about these things.
No gratitude need be voiced. Your mind speaks to us.
Appreciate that, Gene.
You're looking for someone, but it's not Kiss.
True, I'm more into Allison Robertson of the Donnas or, Haley Atwell.
My
from
fiancé Sam, he was taking pictures of you.
Oh, I don't know about
There are
him.
dozens of photographers out there. How could anyone ever...
Who are you talking about, Peter Chris?
He was here.
Oh.
This
Who?
is ridiculous.
Ah! Criminy, Gene.
Sam's still in the park.
All right, thank you, Paul. I don't know where this is going. I better leave. Pardon me, everybody. To sign off for real, I want to say I think rock and roll is the best, and I'm glad we've got it. And also, you're the best for being here to enjoy, talk about rock and roll. I'm glad we've got you, too. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-8255. You may not need that right now. Somebody else might sometime. The National Sexual Assault Hotline, or RAIN, is 1-800-656-4673. Hopefully you never need that, but if you do, I've at least put it in your ear once. Rock and roll music fills me with great joy. And the music of Kiss fills me with great joy. I was just jamming out to Heaven's on Fire, Shout It Out Loud, Strutter, and some of the other tunes from the 70s like King of the Nighttime World, and from the 80s like Lick It Up. 'Cause I couldn't help myself. Also, fun to note that on YouTube Music right now, when you click on Kiss, the number one song in the playlist that comes up as in order of, I guess, demand for single songs is I Was Made for Loving You from 1979's Dynasty. So, believe it or not, there's a lot of love for that era of music. Came right after Kiss Meets the Phantom. And after these solo albums, obviously. Take care. Be nice. It's getting cold out there.